Ah, yes. So it's finally time for me to talk about one of my most beloved tabletop hobbies besides role-playing games, which is Warhammer 40,000. And right here is my Nurgle force, which consists of Nurgle demons and Death Guard Chaos Space Marines. And if we go table down, I can show you here are some of my Nurglings. And of course, leading the Nurglings is the most glamorous of all Nurgling models, in my opinion, and in many people's opinion as well. It's the one with the helmet and with a sort of confidence and prestige that demands to have his own base, not to share a base with the aspiring champion Plague Marine that this came with. And with my Nurglings, I decided to go for something a little different than what the actual official kits are suggesting you do, which is to pile them on top of one another in these big piles. Instead, I wanted to, well, firstly save some money, but also I kind of like the idea of when you're summoning demons. In my mind, I wanted to do something where the earth kind of opens up and underneath comes this evil, chaos, demonic goop that all these monsters kind of ascend from. And I made some objective markers to reflect that, with all these kind of human sacrifices having taken place in these kind of Nurgle chaos pits of evil goo. With these guys, I really like the Nurgling idea of having some levity in your armies, because the setting of Warhammer 40,000 is so serious, so grim dark, and it has so many things where especially the fan community often lashes out when they don't take themselves seriously enough. And for me, this sort of levity that the Nurglings, as well as the kind of things that the space orcs provide, is almost a necessary balance for the grimdark stuff to be really effective and to really sink in. So I enjoy really relishing in these little guys, and coming up with different ways to make them kind of funny and lighthearted. And the squads here, the units, are the minimum number of 3, because I'm using them mostly to fulfill a battalion detachment right here, where also I have the minimum number of plague bearers right here. And you could have them in groups of 30 if you wish, but I haven't gotten around to making any more than this, so 10 it is right now. And leading the charge in the battalion is a Poxbringer and a Sloppity Bile Piper, and I really like that model, again with the levity, with the kind of bagpipe made out of entrails there, and the little Nurgling enjoying the music that's coming out. And in my mind, it has to be, the music that comes out has to be something like the Pablo Francisco Mexican music from his stand-up routine, the see, that stuff. That's how I imagine it. And moving on from them is my prized possession here, is my Supreme Command Detachment, consisting of 3 greater demons of Nurgle, the great unclean ones. And I really like these models. They are pretty much a theme for my army right now. There's 3 customization options with them, with 3 different heads, with different kind of connotations to them. There's ones that are basically just all about appearance differences, like the Cyclops head and this big horned one, but then there's also the third option, which is a actual named character. Both of these 2 guys are armed with the same weapons, with the Bile Sword and the Plague Flail here, and I adorned them with different kinds of Nurglings to surround their base. There's a little bi-curious action going on there in the hot tub. but yeah. With these 2 guys, they're basically taking on the role of being the tanks of my army right here. And leading the charge is the named character Rodigus, the wizard of the Nurgle force, the Rain Father, as his title is. And I love the idea of Rodigus and his seemingly benevolent motivations. You know, Nurgle is not only about death and decay, but it's a balancing act, the kind of circle of life of death and rebirth. The Rodigus sees his actions as a benevolent act, as in the kind of sentient beings that they rot away and destroy with their plagues and diseases are giving themselves up for the benefit of microbiological life forms that will live in their carcasses and in their torturously dying and decaying bodies. So in his mind, he is simply doing the will of the kind of circle of life. And to reflect that, I painted him up with these spiral body paint kind of tribal things to make him kind of stand out more from their other great unclean ones that I have. And I really liked how it turned out. I'm pretty pleased with that stuff. And again, it's just like with the horror of Nurgle and the levity of Nurgle, another balancing act is this benevolence and this horror of what they're doing. And when we move to the Death Guard Chaos Space Marine side, I firstly have my Demon Prince here, and he is not an official Games Workshop product. I came across this model, which is a Warpath model called First Generation Mutant, if I remember correctly. But I fell in love with the way he looks, and since there is a Death Guard relic that gives you a stronger armor that hurts your opponents when they strike you in close combat, if you roll well, it just fit my the kind of picture I had in my head when I saw this bone armor kind of thing. And I put some goop on him to make him look more Nurgly, and he has his own Nurgling there on his base, and as he is being summoned from this goop, there's also a plague bearer trying to get through the threshold as well. And you know, if you turn this around, you can see what it looks like from the other side, which is kind of what you'd expect. But yeah, if you're interested, it's First Generation Mutant from Warpath. And then another HQ character here is a Lord of Contagion, which is made from the Lord Felthius model there, but with little conversions. The head, as well as the Nurgling, are from the same aspiring champion set as this helmeted Nurgling here. And I also did some conversion on the hand. The original Felthius model was holding this artifact that looked way too cartoony and way too kind of, well, I just didn't like the look of it, so I kind of carved it off and replaced it with a plague bearer's skull and some tentacle fingers, as I kind of had to remove some of his fingers to remove the artifact itself. But I really like this model, and with his Man Reaper and his cloak that's full of maggots and goop, you know, he turned out really nicely. Then I have some Poxy Walkers here that are basically plague zombies, and as much as I love these guys, they kind of don't fulfill the role in the game sense that I wish they would. I wish I could have like a giant horde of these easily killable, slowly moving, very cheap kind of zombies, but because their unit size is 20 at maximum, it kind of works against that. If it would be something like 30, it would much more work to the kind of goals that I would have in mind. But still, they kind of work as backfield objective takers with these kind of small groups. But maybe one day, if the rules change, I'll get some more. Here I have some Plague Marines made in this same yellow color pattern. The idea for this color pattern came from an idea of Making an army with a recognizable color pattern from another army. I've often wondered about making a Space Marine army with the orange tint of the Tau. That's very recognizable with them. And with this army, this is pretty much the Bad Moon color scheme of the Orcs. And I just really liked how it turned out, and I'm going forward with this. And here I have a fitted blow drone, and again, I'm trying to balance the creepy and the kind of comedic levity here with the eyeball. It's kind of, I find it kind of creepy that it's an unblinking, constantly staring eyeball, but at the same time you can find that kind of funny, but it's kind of, you're gonna find it threatening as it's kind of just zooming at you with this pus and just spewing these kind of toxic fumes from its plague spitters there. And then, last but not least, I have my Hel Brood here. This is the very first model I started doing in this army, but not the first one I finished, just the first one I started. But, again here, when I'm kind of going through this, you can see how pretty clean a lot of the armor is. I made some green stuff blisters there to add the Nurgle effect more into it. But, I've seen so many people kind of overdo the kind of rotting, oozing, kind of corroding Nurgle stuff that I kind of felt that a lot of people go overboard with it, where the more you have of that kind of detail, the more it kind of obfuscates other detail. Nurgle models already are really busy with a lot of details, and oftentimes that can kind of suffocate the models, where if you have something very detailed and the rest are kind of blank and clean, that detailed thing kind of stands out. But if everything is super detailed, then kind of nothing stands out, if you know what I mean. And with the paint jobs, I wanted to kind of reflect that as well, where I wanted to do things like the green goop coming from places, and also these kind of glistening flesh, like the neck of this demon prince here, that I could do with varnish and stuff like that. But I didn't want to go too far with rust effects. I didn't want to go too far with everything seeping some kind of gore out of it and that sort of thing. So I think the way I use the kind of amount of plague stuff on these models turned out pretty nicely. And yeah, the Great Unclean ones are pretty much my main theme, and wouldn't you believe it, the fourth Great Unclean one I'm gonna have is already in the mail on the way, which is gonna be the Forge World version. And once it arrives, I'm going to make a stage-by-stage painting video about that when I get my hands on it, so look for that in the future. Yeah, this is pretty much it. I also have a Necron Force that I started with, but that's much less consistent in quality and having actually finished models. But these guys are pretty much at a good spot at this point in time. Warhammer 40,000 is one of those hobbies that I picked up at the same time I picked up role-playing back when I was like 13, but it's also something that where I originally wasn't that interested in the gaming aspect of it, only in the collecting and painting aspect of it. And when you're a student and you have a hobby like this, it tends to get pretty expensive pretty quickly, so it became a kind of on-again, off-again kind of a hobby. But a couple of years ago, the 8th edition rule set came out, so that's when I started this hobby once again, and I've been loving it. It's one of those things that I just love to do, and it mixes a lot of things I love about tabletop gaming. I've never been really big into using miniatures in role-playing games, but I love miniatures in like straight up miniature games, so this is straight up my alley. So yeah, stay tuned for more Warhammer themed content to come in the future, but Here you go. Here's my Nurgle force. Ah, yeah.